The room waits for me exactly as it did the last time I stood here, dust suspended in a thin, unmoving stripe of winter light, as if the years never touched it. Every shelf, every cardboard box, every forgotten scrap holds the same muted stillness. It feels less like a storage room and more like a stopped moment, a fragment of time sealed inside an envelope that no one dared to open. When I push the door wider, the hinges release a low, tired breath, and the air shifts just enough to reveal the faint outline of footprints that are no longer mine. The old evidence room of the county station hasn't changed since 1984, and stepping back inside carries the same weight it did then, quiet, steady, precise. I don't come with fresh certainty, nor with the promise of closure. I come because the file pulled me back, a single page resurfacing inside the system after decades of motionless records. Her name returns first, Adria Linwood, age 26, a name that once sat at the center of a long, steady investigation that drifted into the stacks when clarity slipped away. She grew up in the timber edges outside Helena, raised by a family who lived simple, steady routines. Known for working at a small design shop, known for the quiet way she outlined every idea in her notebook, known for a kind of calm that made her memorable without loudness. A woman who moved through the world with intention. A woman whose absence left a space the community still felt, even when they didn't speak of it anymore. When I lift the folder, the dust rises in a faint stream, drifting like old breath through the narrow beam of light. I place the file on the metal table, the sound soft, controlled, almost careful. For a moment, I simply look at the cover, the faded ink, the corner fold that never flattened, the year written in rushed handwriting, 1984. I remember the day the case closed without resolution, the weight of it, the sense of something incomplete, like a sentence missing a word. It wasn't failure, it was a pause, a suspended line of thought waiting for a future I never expected to reach. Now that future is here. I open the file slowly. No rush. Cold patience remains the only fitting pace for a memory like this. Inside lies the first image, a grainy black and white photograph of the quiet cabin where Adria was last seen. No dramatic angles, no sensational framing, just the structure itself, small, wooden, edged by tall grass. The place where stillness settled long before we ever arrived. My gloved hand moves along the photo's border, pausing when I feel the raised texture of dried adhesive. Someone, at some point, lifted this image from its original slot and returned it slightly off-center. A tiny detail, easy to overlook. But detail is the only thing that solves time. A second image sits beneath it, Adria's personal portrait, her expression steady, gentle, her eyes direct. There is nothing dramatic in her face, only clarity, the kind that tells you she lived with quiet observation. I study the picture longer than I intend to, allowing the silence of the room to shape the memory. The next page is a photocopy of her final known schedule, neatly handwritten entries, mostly routine, design shop hours, notes about material orders, a reminder about calling her sister. A single line stands out, deliver sketch set Thursday. No location noted, no client name, just the task. I turn the page. A thin envelope slips out and lands on the desk with a muted tap. Its flap has never been opened. The seal remains intact, untouched. It's marked simply with a number, 16B. The handwriting is unfamiliar. I position the envelope neatly, resisting the pull to open it right away. Instead, I continue through the file, maintaining the slow, investigative rhythm that all cold cases demand. Years blur if rushed. Evidence unravels if handled with eagerness. A statement file comes next. The first interview from 1984, notes scribbled along the margins, some in my handwriting. The main witness at the time, a neighbor named Ridgeline, described seeing Adria near her cabin the evening before the report was filed. His words were sparse then, fragmented. I read them again, letting them settle. She walked in a calm way, just carried papers, didn't seem troubled. A shadow near the tree line, maybe nothing, hard to tell. I heard something like a soft thud, maybe a branch, maybe. The pauses, even in written form, carry the same unfinished quality they did decades ago. I flip to the next sheet. There's a timestamp from a second interview, one conducted 3 days later. The handwriting looks more strained, as if the original officer had pressed harder into the paper, trying to extract certainty from words that wouldn't cooperate. She said something about a delivery, didn't mention who. There was a figure, not sure if it was a person, could have been. I thought it meant nothing. The lines trail off again. I lean back slightly. The room remains still. No hum from the lights, no echo of footsteps, only the quiet hinge of the past holding its place. I return to the envelope. Its weight feels wrong for an empty container. Something paper-thin rests inside, one sheet, maybe two. The seal gives way with a soft, precise tear. Inside is a lone photograph, smaller than standard prints, almost passport-sized. Adria's sketchbook lies open on a table, pages visible but blurred. Someone appears to have taken the picture without her knowledge, standing close yet capturing only the objects, not her face. It raises the question: why photograph the sketchbook and not the artist? I lift the photo closer, studying every edge. A faint smudge marks the lower right corner, a fingerprint once pressed into the glossy surface before it dried. In 1984, we lacked the precision needed to extract useful detail from something this faint. Today, it might be different. But the bigger question sits quietly in the middle of the frame. There is a design on the page, just a portion of it visible. A set of geometric lines intersecting shapes, something like a blueprint but not enough to identify. Not furniture, not landscape, not an object of daily use. Something else. I turn to the file's index, sliding each page forward until I find the list of collected items. Sketchbook, missing, entry logged by Officer Hale. I remember asking Hale about it once, years after the case cooled. He only shook his head and said, "We looked, it wasn't there, never was." But the photograph proves it existed, proves someone saw it, proves someone cared enough to capture it. My pulse stays steady, controlled. Curiosity sharpens, but emotion remains distant. That is the discipline cold cases teach. Next in the folder is a letter, typed unsigned, a simple message. Her work was not random. The pattern repeats, look again. No date, no origin. The stamp had been removed before the letter was logged. I sift through my memories and recall the reason. Adhesive residue tested negative for useful detail, so the envelope was discarded. Only the letter stayed. All these years later, the phrasing still carries a quiet, steady insistence. Look again. I continue reading through the remaining documents, maps, inventory records, early forensic notes. Most of the pages offer nothing new, but the last item at the very bottom is what pulls everything into sharper focus. A photograph of a wooden beam inside Adria's cabin, marked with faint pencil lines. I hold the image still and study it for a long moment. The lines curve gently, intersecting in a pattern that echoes the shape from the sketchbook photo. A pattern she kept repeating. A pattern someone photographed. A pattern someone wanted erased. The room feels colder now, though the air hasn't shifted. Something familiar, something mathematical, something quietly intentional lingers beneath the surface of these lines. This was never random. I placed the beam photograph beside the sketchbook photograph and examined them together. The angles, the spacing, the rhythm, not identical but connected. And suddenly, I realized what this means. Adria wasn't drawing objects. She was mapping something, recording something, observing something precise, steady, recurring, something near her cabin, perhaps, something in the environment, something she noticed before anyone else. I reached for the final page in the folder, one I never fully understood in 1984, a topographic sketch of the terrain near her home. Simple, rough, but accurate. A set of ridgelines, a curve in the tree line, a shallow dip in the land that doesn't appear on official maps. She marked it with a small circle. I never asked why. Now, decades later, that circle feels less like a mark and more like a whisper from a case that refused to fade. I close the file slowly, the weight of it steady in my hands. The silence of the room tightens again, not hostile, not heavy, simply expectant. The feeling that the past is waiting for a question I never asked. A question I must ask now. Because justice, even when delayed, moves in a mechanical line. But truth has its own quiet pace, returning only when someone finally listens. I exhale once, gather the file, and prepare to reopen the case. The silence follows me out. The corridor outside the evidence room feels narrower than I remember. Dim overhead lamps cast thin streaks along the floor, and the walls carry the faint scent of old paper, warm, muted, familiar. I walk with the file pressed steady under my arm, every step silent, unhurried. Reopening a cold case requires calm, not urgency. The past resists force. It opens only through method. I return to my desk, a plain surface cleared for this single purpose. The chair creaks lightly when I sit, the sound brief, almost hesitant. I place the file at the center and let the quiet settle again. Then I reopen it. The topographic sketch waits for me. A set of ridgelines drawn in Adria Linwood's steady handwriting, the circle marking a shallow stretch of ground near her cabin. A place no one thought important in 1984. A place we dismissed as nothing more than uneven soil and scattered brush. Now it sits at the center of everything. I lift the sketch and hold it at an angle beneath the desk lamp. The lines align with surprising precision. Adria may have been a designer by profession, but this drawing carries a level of observation that feels deeper, deliberate, analytical, almost cartographic in intent. Why map the land unless something required recording? A soft tap breaks the silence as I set the page down. The pattern from the cabin beam returns to mind, the same curved structure, subtle but present, a shape repeated with intention. I spread the photographs across the desk, the beam, the sketchbook image, the topographic layout, 3 fragments of a quiet story she left behind. Something about the spacing between the curved lines feels familiar. I reach for a ruler from the drawer and measure a segment of the beam's pencil marks. The measurement is uneven, almost naturally so, hinting that the marks reflect something observed rather than something designed. Then I shift to the sketchbook photograph and measure the visible curve. The ratio falls close, not exact, but close enough to suggest they belong to the same visual pattern in different forms. It reminds me of landscape contour studies, natural shapes interpreted through repeated observation. Which means Adria saw this pattern more than once. I return to her schedule page, the handwritten deliver sketch set Thursday. The missing location becomes more important now. Perhaps the delivery wasn't for a client. Perhaps it wasn't for work at all. Perhaps she was delivering the pattern itself. I let that thought settle before moving forward. A thin breeze moves through the small gap beneath the window, shifting a loose sheet of paper across the desk. The soft whisper of its motion brings back a distant memory, being in that cabin decades ago, the same sound echoing against old wood. I remember seeing her table blank of any drawings. I remember thinking it odd that someone so meticulous would leave no papers behind. Now I wonder if someone cleared them before we arrived. I study the photograph again, the small one from the envelope showing her sketchbook open. The camera angle is slightly tilted, taken from someone standing close to the table. The edges of the room blur into soft shadow, revealing just enough to confirm the setting. A narrow shelf, the window frame, the corner of the table. This photograph was taken inside her cabin. Yet we never recovered her sketchbook. Something essential was removed long before the case began. I pull out the typed letter again. Her work was not random. The pattern repeats, look again. Unsigned, undated, a single message that waited decades for meaning. For the first time, the letter feels less like a hint and more like a quiet admission. Someone knew her work held importance, someone who didn't step forward, someone who observed from the edges. I organize the documents into a careful sequence: sketchbook photo, beam pattern, terrain map. Together, they form something approaching a timeline of her insight. A sound outside the office, footsteps steady, fatting, someone passing through the hallway. No interruption comes, no voices, just transit. I turn my attention back to Adria's profile page. Age 26, design background, noted interest in field sketching. She visited the ridgelines around her home often, recording tree shapes and sunlight patterns. Simple habits that looked artistic then. Now they look deliberate. I pause, letting each detail drift into place. If the pattern appears on the beam inside her cabin, then she transferred it from her sketches to her living space. Not as decoration, these lines lack flourish, but as reference, which suggests she was tracking something. I retrieve the land survey from 1984, an official map with standard contour markings. I overlay Adria's sketch beside it, aligning north with north. Her circled location, marked by her own hand, corresponds to a low depression near the tree line. The official map shows nothing unusual there. But Adria drew it with purpose. I mark the spot with a small pencil dot on my copy. Then I pause. A memory surfaces, subtle, almost forgotten. On the second day of the original investigation, we walked the perimeter around the cabin. The ground felt soft in places, strangely patterned, but we chalked it up to early thaw and natural drainage. We didn't test the soil. We didn't measure the dip. But Adria did. My eyes shift to the typewritten letter again. 3 quiet sentences, 1 message. The pattern repeats. I retrieve the original interview notes from her neighbor, Ridgeline. His hesitant words float across the page. A shadow near the tree line, maybe nothing. He heard something like a soft thud. Not dramatic, not definitive, but consistent. Something moved near that circle she drew. I flipped to my own handwritten notes from 1984, thin lines in fatting blue ink. A detail I underlined then without understanding. Ground near East Ridge feels irregular. Return later for measurement. We never returned, the case shifted direction. Leads scattered, evidence felt thin, time moved. Yet the ground didn't. I reposition the topographic sketch beneath the lamp. The circle isn't a casual mark. The pencil pressure thickens around the border, as though she pressed harder to ensure it wouldn't be overlooked. My eyes traced the curve again. Close to her cabin, close to her daily path, close enough that she saw the pattern clearly often. What pattern repeats in nature with such precision? Light, movement, pressure. I leaned forward slightly, elbows on the desk, absorbing the lines again. The arc of the curve resembles the gentle sweep of a hillside, but only in part. The rest feels constructed. Not artificial, just shaped by something steady over time, something that left an imprint. I reach once more for the photograph of the beam. Pencil lines faint but intentional. She copied something she saw outside and brought it inside. Not decoration, a reminder, a record. My breath stays calm as I shift focus. Logical progression remains the only path. If Adria sketched shapes from the land that did not appear on official maps, then she saw formations not yet documented. Subtle impressions, perhaps seasonal. Something that required returning, observing, redrawing. Her schedule line, deliver sketch set Thursday, gains weight. Sketches of what, for whom, why deliver them at all? I scanned the file for any reference to outside contacts. She had no ongoing work with surveyors, no scheduled consultations with local groups, no documented commissions. Which leaves only the possibility that she planned to show someone specific, someone outside formal channels. Someone who might have understood the pattern. I lift the envelope again, feeling for any remaining content. Empty. Only the photograph was inside. Someone wanted that image kept safe. I rise from my chair and walk to the window. The glass feels cool beneath my fingertips. Outside, the faint outline of the ridges sits in the distance, darker shapes against a pale horizon. Time has softened them, but their presence remains steady. The terrain itself hasn't changed, only our interpretation has. I return to the desk and retrieve the file's final pages, a short summary from the closing week of the original investigation. My notes indicate there were no signs of struggle near the cabin, no disturbance in the soil except natural irregularities, no clear trail. But Adria's map shows a trail, a shape, a curve, something repeating. I spread the documents again, forming a line of thought across the desk. Photograph, right arrow beam, pattern right arrow, terrain sketch, right arrow circled location. Right arrow, undelivered sketches, right arrow, anonymous letter. A structure begins to form, not coincidence, not intuition. Data. The same data she saw. The same data someone else saw. A soft thump draws my attention, just the settling of a book on the far shelf, nothing more. It breaks nothing, changes nothing. I return to the patterns. Inside the sketchbook photo, there is a detail I overlooked earlier. The corner of the page numbers small, faint, but visible. 3742, multiple pages, a set. A set she intended to deliver. Yet none of those pages are in the case file. Which means someone removed the entire sequence. I sift through the folder one more time, confirming the absence. No loose pages, no extra sketches, nothing except the single photo. The missing sketches become as significant as the ones we still have. If she documented something carefully enough to produce a series, then the repeated pattern holds meaning, geographic, environmental, or observational. The faint image on the cabin beam suggests longevity, something she saw long enough to copy. The typed letter, though brief, implies urgency. Look again. The writer expected someone would eventually return to the pattern. And now I have. I gather the photographs and map them mentally onto the geography. The circle corresponds with the dip in the land. The beam lines mimic the curve in the terrain. The sketchbook shows a larger version of the same shape. This is no random phenomenon. Adria saw something consistent, predictable, measurable. Something she thought worth documenting. My thoughts slow further, moving with deliberate precision. If she observed repeated shapes in the land, she may have traced something buried beneath the surface. Subtle shifts, slight depressions, recurring forms. The ground itself might have been moving, shaping, settling. Not by force, by time. As the realization settles, the room feels still again, like the beginning of a silent sequence. Adria wasn't tracking danger. She was tracking change. The kind of change that doesn't announce itself. The kind that only reveals its shape through patient observation over days, weeks, months. I look once more at the circle she drew. A place that dipped. A place she marked. A place no one revisited. Until now. The next morning arrives without urgency. Light enters the office in a pale, steady wash, brushing softly across the documents I left arranged on the desk overnight. Nothing has shifted. The patterns remain exactly where I placed them, forming a quiet line of reasoning that waited patiently for the final step. I sit and allow a moment to pass before reopening the file. The topographic sketch sits on top, the circle at its center almost understated. Yet no detail in Adria's work ever lacked intention. Her lines always carried purpose. Today, that purpose becomes clear. I retrieve a fresh field sheet from the drawer and begin transferring the shapes, beam pattern first, then the photograph of the sketchbook, then her marked terrain map. As the lines overlap, they begin forming a layered contour. Some marks align, others diverge slightly, but the overall shape remains consistent. A gentle arc, a depression, a repeated curve. The same structure appears in each source. I draw a faint outline around the combined pattern. It forms a shape I recognize not from casework, but from routine geological surveys conducted years after the original investigation concluded. A natural settling of ground often caused by layered soil shifting slowly over time. Nothing dramatic, nothing sudden, nothing that would draw attention at a glance. Except to someone patient enough to study it. I lean back slightly, letting the quiet understanding settle. The truth, in its simplest form, is this. Adria observed a recurring depression in the terrain outside her cabin, a pattern shaped over time by natural movement. The ground was reshaping itself in slow, predictable increments. She mapped it, copied it, transferred it to her living space. She planned to deliver her full set of sketches, perhaps to someone who understood the landscape, perhaps simply to confirm her own observations. No hidden event, no dramatic interference, no unseen danger. Just the land. Its slow, quiet shift. The realization is steady, grounded. The case that once held mystery and uncertainty now rests on observation, not speculation. Her sketches were not symbols, not warnings, not signals. They were evidence of her own careful eye, her attention to small, repeating details others overlooked. I close my own field sheet and place it beside the original materials. The narrative, once seen as fragmented, now aligns into a clear line of logic. Still, one question remains. Why did the sketchbook vanish? I study the small envelope once more, the lone photograph inside it. Someone kept this single image safe through decades of silence. Someone removed the sketchbook from the scene before the investigation began. The absence feels deliberate but not destructive. It feels protective. Perhaps someone close to her understood the value of her work. Perhaps they believed the sketches belonged to her alone. Perhaps they feared the notebook would be misunderstood, or misplaced, or lost in procedure. Removing it may have been an attempt to preserve something personal. The typed letter reflects the same quiet intent. Her work was not random. The pattern repeats, look again. Not a warning, an invitation. Not from someone hiding truth. Someone hopping it would eventually be seen. I let the letter rest at the top of the file. There remains no indication of wrongdoing, only absence, only unanswered questions shaped by incomplete memory and the quiet erosion of time. Adria's disappearance from her community was documented as unexpected, but no detail in the file suggests forced separation. No signatures of struggle appear in the preserved images. Her path simply diverged from the routine one day, leaving observations behind that held deeper meaning only she fully understood. I turn the cabin photograph over and examine its blank back. Even its silence feels deliberate. She lived in a place shaped slowly by the ground beneath it, and she noticed something others never did. A natural process, a gentle shift, an evolving shape in the land. She recorded it because recording was her way of seeing. Perhaps the missing sketchbook rests somewhere quiet, a drawer, a box, a shelf in a place untouched by urgency, preserved by someone who valued her work as much as she did. I gather the documents into a clean sequence. The beam photograph first, then the terrain sketch, then the letter, then the schedule page. Each piece remains part of a logical chain, each detail contributing to the final picture. A soft sound breaks the stillness, a file sliding into place on a nearby desk, a colleague moving through morning tasks. Life around the office continues, steady and unchanged. The quiet rhythm of investigation persists as it always does. I return to Adria's portrait one last time. Her expression remains calm, observant. She faced the world with clarity, not intensity. And now her work, finally understood, reflects that same quiet clarity. I slide the photograph into a protective sleeve and close the folder. The case does not end with declarations. There is no moment of dramatic resolution. There is only understanding, slow, methodical, grounded in observation. The land shifted. She recorded it. Her notes formed a pattern. The pattern repeats. A simple truth built from steady lines. I rise from the desk, file in hand, and walk toward the storage wing. The hallway stretches ahead, lit by a soft wash of morning light. Each step echoes faintly, the sound gentle and evenly spaced. The weight of the folder feels lighter now, not empty but balanced. When I reach the archive door, I pause before opening it. A small moment of reflection settles quietly without force. Cases like this rarely offer emotional closure. They offer clarity. They offer the shape of truth, even when the final pages remain unwritten. Inside, the shelves wait in still rows. I place the folder in its new position, front, center, meticulously labeled with the updated findings. A case no longer suspended, no longer drifting. A case understood. I rest my hand on the spine for a moment. Not in farewell, not in satisfaction, just in recognition. Justice, in its mechanical motion, marks the case complete. But truth moves differently, slower, quieter, carried through small details someone cared enough to record. When I step back into the hall, morning light has shifted slightly, just enough to draw a faint arc across the floor. A shape repeating. A reminder that some stories find their resolution not through final answers, but through understanding the quiet intention behind them. The past remains unchanged. The pattern remains. The land continues its slow, steady movement. And somewhere, in a place I may never see, Adria's missing sketchbook holds the full measure of her observation, pages of lines that shape the path back to this moment. I walk forward, leaving the archive behind, the file now part of a completed record. Yet something human lingers, a gentle awareness that some truths exist not to close a story, but to illuminate it. The case stands complete, but the echo of her work stays with me, quiet, precise, unresolved in the way all sincere observations remain. A pattern repeating long after the page is turned.